Welcome to Kettlebell Corner, where strength meets theory, where we take you on a deeper dive into all things kettlebells. I'm Jeremiah Waylon, and he's Roger Parks. And today, Roger, I need you to prove it to me. That's right. Prove it before you can move on. Prove it or lose it. Have you heard this?
No. I think it's.
I just made that up right
a
now.
labored saying you're trying to make up in real time.
Yes, that's right. Real time. So if you like that saying, comment. Speaking of comments, we got this question in our comments, and we just chosen this opportunity to answer it. And the question was, how do you know if you are moving well enough to progress? And progression is always a good thing, or it can be a bad thing. We're going to determine that. But first, we should define what moving well enough is. And in the last episode, if you listen to it, we expressed that movement competency was the foundation, and then you build off of that. And that was in reference to goals. But
yes,
in reference to progress, how can we frame this up for them in that regard?
Well, the goal of movement competency was where I recommend people start, because you're gonna get a lot of other crossover goals. So that raises the question: if movement is the place to start, how do you know when it's time to continue? So we could probably frame this up in two ways, because I can see two very valid ways to think about this, and I could see two groups of people wanting a slightly different answer. So let's start with movement competency, just meaning, are you competent at movement? Do you do it well? In regard to pain. And then let's talk about movement competency, assuming things are normal-ish. And in each scenario, you're going to look at things a little differently, and you may decide to move on or not move on. Okay. So movement competency means that you were competent at movement, and that is not a good definition.
Okay.
And why it's not a good definition is this is not something that's universally agreed upon. I can't expound upon that. Different people mean different things. So I could tell you, what my definition is, and I will. But when a lot of people say this, it's usually kind of an empty term unless you've established context between you and the person you're coaching. Or,
so it's like,
yes,
it's like porn. You know it when you see it.
In some cases, you do know of a movement if you are an expert. In some ways, if a movement works, but there are times when movements look good but still hurt. And I would say if you've got pain, that would be one of my things where I would say, you may not be a competent mover. Doesn't mean you necessarily are. Sometimes you can be doing things the right way and there still could be pain. But I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, because that's a different episode
another day.
Entirely.
It
is another day. So what movement competency is or isn't is largely left up to the coach or the person. And for someone watching this and you're trying to figure out, am I a good mover? Am I good enough mover? You really need to get into context, and you need to get into outcomes. So by context, I mean, what are all the things that are going on in your training background? What am I trying to do? Do I have a timeline? Can I be patient? Can I, am I in a hurry? Is this a big lofty, am I really, really moving towards something? For example, I need to move more. I need to lose X amount of pounds before I have this life-saving surgery. And my doctor says I need to exercise. Well, then you got a little bit of a time crunch. There are so many factors that it's kind of silly to talk about without, having a very specific case in mind. But movement competency doesn't mean perfect movement, in my opinion. A lot of people think it does. A lot of people think it, each joint that you're going to move through has a certain number of degrees that you can move through. And many people think that until you can move through all of those degrees and you are strong while moving through all of those degrees, until that happens, you are not a competent mover and you should not continue to progress your exercise. I do not agree with that.
I would say that sounds like it'd take forever.
It might, because you've been coaching long enough And you've also been training yourself long enough to know movement is very rarely perfect. When you get into the best movers, and by best movers, I have to define that by outcome. Now, I can't, you might look at, let's say, you might look at a track and field athlete, and you might watch someone, they don't move through the world in an ideal way for anything other than running. They may not have what we think is full motion of their joints. I've often seen track athletes who have such a tremendous arch in their low back, which helps them be very, very fast, and use the low back along with the muscles behind them, the glutes and the hamstrings. It allows additional range of motion, additional force, even though they may not possess all of the range of motion at their joints. But when it comes to this particular movement, these are the best people in the world. You look at a lot of, football players. You look at a lot of any professional athlete. I remember looking at, I'm not a fan of LeBron James personally. I don't watch sports. I just don't like his shenanigans. I don't know why that's relevant.
Okay.
I'm just throwing it out there because I don't have any particular affinity for picking this guy. He is a great athlete. He moves like shit most of the time. You put a basketball in his hands and he's fantastic. I saw a video of him doing tremendously stupid stuff with whatever passes to be his personal trainer. And it was nonsense. And
I did see that video as well.
He was doing stupid exercises and he wasn't doing them well. Okay. Yeah. Now, did they help him? I don't know. Another episode, do the stupid, the stupid professional trainers, do they actually make their athletes better? Is LeBron James no matter what? Probably.
Yeah, I would say lean more towards that. And I don't know if it's you, but like the people I train, I often get a lot of videos sent to me of mostly the NBA trainers training their people. And I'm like, I don't know what's up with that. That's like weird. And then they send me Shohei Ohtani doing trap bar deadlifts. I'm like, that's actually correct.
Yeah, I see a spectrum. I've seen some of these people in person, and I've known some people who are trainers at very high levels, and guess what? They don't know what they're doing. They really, really don't. They stumbled into it somehow. Somehow they're being trusted with these people. But this is a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it all goes to the idea is that if you have someone who, whether I like LeBron James or not, there's no question that he's a fantastic athlete. And that he's one of the best basketball players that's ever lived. So would you say he doesn't move well? If I'm looking in one sense at, hey, can this guy squat without getting a tremendous amount of motion through his low back? And if out of context, if I'm just looking at exercise, I'm like, wow, that squat's garbage. You, sir, don't know how to squat.
But you see him on the basketball court, and you're like, oh, you can do it all.
So, where do we land here when we ask this question? What is good movement? So there's a lot of context, but that goes along with it. But I definitely don't think it's perfect movement. And I think that if you are chasing perfection, you're never going to catch it. And the second you start to load that illusory, mythical, perfect movement, it's going to change. Yeah. And when you start adding volume and you start adding load, movement is not perfect anymore. So then you have to regress, and it's an infinite loop, and you're wasting your time. And often the perfect movement people are the functional people who look like they've never lifted anything in their lives. And sometimes that matters. You can have a lot of theoretical information and be a great coach, but not necessarily have done the thing. But I do think that in a perfect world, you have the information and you've done the thing. And many of the people who, it's like, oh, my movement's perfect. I was like, okay, but what can you do with it? And as soon as you see them in the real world, it falls apart. You can't catch a ball. You can't run fast. You can't lift heavy. But wow, look at you exercising.
You're a great exerciser. Exactly. High rocks.
We need to think about these things in context. So, it is not perfect movement. Now, we do have to ask ourselves an additional question: is, do you progress somebody when they're in pain? And the answer to that is no. Yeah. There's a difference between poor movement and poor movement with pain. Yeah. So if you move poorly or not ideally or not optimally, that is what people like to say, yet you're not in pain and you're clearly making progress, could it be time to progress? It absolutely could be, in my opinion. And these are the things we want to think about, because let's say if we go down to the level of the joint and the joint is not functioning well because, there's some tightness or some compression, there's something going on that, does not allow the joint to move freely, right? Many of the big joints, they have articulations and sometimes, like, look at a big joint like the hip. You got a big ball and socket joint, right? Well, we're sitting down too much, or maybe we've got an old injury, and suddenly the head, the head of the of the femur, which is the ball, cannot move freely in the socket, which is the little pocket or where the joint goes into the pelvis, right? So these two things don't articulate well together, and you have restriction. Okay, now you have some choices in looking at this, but there may be changes over time. There may be bony changes. Sometimes the tendons and ligaments might be getting chewed up, and practicing additional movements is leading to injury. And in some cases, well, you're not moving ideally through that joint, but you're limiting the range of motion to what you have. Meaning, let's say, as an example, you're trying to squat and you don't possess full range of motion in your hips. Well, let me just squat you where I see you own the movement, where you're more comfortable. Is it ideal? Mm-hmm. No, but I want you to get stronger. I want you to, to eventually, we've got other things we want to do, and I don't want to spend 6 months getting you to squat perfectly to load you up, because let's say I'm watching you and you are improving your squat as you go, which is another thing we should return to in a moment. And it's kind of it's also, I think, kind of a myth of exercise, the order of events. But, I'm watching you and you're squatting better and I'm squatting you more, so we're not having any pain. In that case, I might progress you. But in a case where, you're getting this catching of tendons and ligaments, and these things are getting chewed up, and, you're getting further, maybe some arthritic changes, that might be a time to say, hey, this is not, like, we've got to work on the movement now, especially if we have pain.
I like what you said there about owning the movement, because you don't have to be perfect at it, but you can do it in a sufficient manner, beyond body weight, maybe even with load or whatever, just in the range that works for you, that's pain free. So that mm-hmm. feels like a good thing you can kind of like hold on to a little bit, be like, do you own this movement? That's sort of the prove it. Can you prove it? Can you own this movement? And then,
sure. I've been hearing since I started training about, the dreaded micro trauma. Well, if you're not moving well, you're going to get this micro trauma, which is going to lead to macro trauma, which is going to lead to this, this horrible injury.
Yikes.
Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. There's no way to know. There's no way to see it. And unfortunately, sometimes you might make the wrong call. But I do know if you don't train something, you will get worse.
Yes, now, that's a fact.
That doesn't mean hammer it. That doesn't mean go, full ass to grass squats with a lot of load. It might just be like, hey, what can you manage? And maybe you can only manage in a certain range. Maybe you can only manage a certain volume. But we do need to separate. How do we know it's time to progress? If you are feeling pain, if you are losing balance when you're doing a movement, these are signs that you are definitely not ready to progress. And those two things can sometimes go hand in hand. But if we separate pain, even though you may not have a full range of motion, I do think that it may at some point be time to progress, and you need to do it intelligently, and you need to monitor what is the volume and what is the load. The myth I talked to before, and this is what I was taught when I was a new trainer, is you can't load something until you have that movement. We've talked about this before. This is a Greg Cook thing, mobility before stability. And, the idea is let's make sure that a joint moves well before we load it up. Well, it's not a bad idea in theory or in common sense, but in practice, having done this for 20 something years, I have clients who don't move well and can't move well, will never move well. However, I have to exercise them. I have to, continue to get them stronger where they are. And guess what? Their range of motion has improved over time. And you can make the argument, oh, well, they're just compensating better. Maybe, but they're also pain-free.
Yeah. And
they're also able to do more. They're growing muscle mass.
Yeah.
Their body fat is dropping. So you can make the argument, well, it's just not perfect. Like, okay, well, you're not perfect.
Yeah, nobody's perfect. All right? Nobody's perfect.
So let's separate the pain thing, and let's say if we have to put this in another bucket, this has to be another conversation if there is pain or if there's injury, right? If there is, then it's a different conversation. We need a lot more context. And let's just disqualify this from now. Okay. Let's say people don't move all that well, or let's say their movement isn't ideal, optimal, perfect, whatever you want to call it. They don't have all the range of motion, all the degrees at a joint. However, you think it might be time to progress them beyond this basic, hey, let's just work on how well you move. Now it might be time to add load and add volume. What are we looking for here? So what are the times that we're not going to, we talked about earlier in prep, we talked about some of the red lights and some of the green lights. So what are some of the red lights?
Red light, of course, pain. That was pretty obvious. And then you had balance. So if you aren't able to hold your balance, it's not going to make a lot of sense to increase intensity or load. So fix that. And another one is the cognitive load, or like something like the thinking factor. Or do you have to like really think about every single thing you're doing? And especially with kettlebells, right now I'm working with a new guy, and these are concepts that are sort of fairly new. And understanding even a get up, the get up was where he's like, I want to learn this. And I said, okay, I'll teach you that. But you have to think about it all the way through. And I'm giving him these little limericks to like remember, like place and trace and put your hand in place, and then that's how you get there. And he's like, oh, I say that every time now. I go, but yeah, if you are still saying it, let's hold off on adding that kettlebell to the mix, So I would say that thinking is one, right?
No question. But let's go back. Why do you think I singled out balance? Why, if you're having balance issues, why do you think that I'm not okay with moving people forward?
Well, if we go based on the algorithm, stance is going to be the number one, first thing. And if you're not balanced, you can increase the chance of injury. You're not going to be able to align things up. And, I would say that, nobody wants to fall over with a kettlebell over their head and, break things.
I think I agree with all of that. I think the simplest way I can put it is if you still don't have balance during a movement, you haven't figured out how to stand, how to hold a bell, or what your limitations are. You don't understand the lines, so you can't color within them. And until we have that, we can't make intelligent choices to move forward. Because if every time you move, let's say you do a squat and your feet are in a different position, that's not repeatable. That's not something that we can monitor, right? Oh, that was a good set. Yeah, but you were standing differently. Mm-hmm. Now, just as well as I do, having done it, experienced it, and seen it, hundreds and hundreds of times, maybe thousands.
Let's say thousands. That's cred.
When people are good at something, you see the setup the same way every time. Mm-hmm. Right. They know, they put their feet and like something registers. That's not quite right. Yeah. I see it a lot when people set up with a swing. I was like, oh no, that's not quite right. So big question for me is when I have to adjust your stance, you're not quite ready yet. So the balance is a big one for that reason. And plus, when your feet are always in a different place, you're not doing very close to the same movement every time. So let's get that a little closer, and then we can move on. And then yes, the cognitive load is, which hand am I using? Mm-hmm. Or where should my stance is here, and I got to remember this and I got to remember that. If you're going through all this rehearsal, which is fantastic, you're still in a place where, as far as motor learning, I was taught that you were in the cognitive phase of motor learning. And the cognitive phase of motor learning is when you're using the thinking part of your brain, not automatic. Anything let's go back. We like to talk about your pickleball game these days.
Oh my God.
So you're such a champ at pickleball. When you see that ball, it just automatically, you lunge. You don't like what happened. You've already made the shot.
Of a watermelon.
You don't even need to think about it. You're just on that shot. But anytime somebody is actually good at something, and
was that a dig?
They have
see
that,
me play, Roger.
They have that expertise. It's just something that happens automatically.
Well, yeah, and another fine example, maybe even more relevant to a kettlebell podcast, is my proficiency in a hard style kettlebell technique is quite well. I've proven myself a number of times through people that give me paper to say, hey, you did that well. And then just fact of the matter, the achievements I've had with it personally. And then now going into a sports style, I was even mentioning this to you. One of the coaching points was in fact had to do with my feet and the balance. Where am I leaning into these things? Am I able to get this sort of pendulum movement down, which is completely different than, what we set up for hard style.
Sure.
So that is a point, and that is why when I'm doing these things, I'm using, and this sounds crazy, but I'm using a 12 kilo bell for these snatches, because I'm like, well, why can't I want to make sure I get this right, and then I can up to whatever the next one is for me and being in that groove. And so I did a session like that, figured that out. And then today when I was doing some work, I had gone up in a weight. It's a weight I can handle. It's 20 kilos. It's nothing crazy. And it's not like the technique isn't far off, but I noticed that, this required a little bit more in the way of what I needed to change as far as balance and these sort of things. So it's sort of staying in that line. So no matter where you're at, that is a very crucial thing. Sure. And I'm still thinking about it. So I shouldn't be progressing to a 24 kilo bell, even though I know I can snatch a 24 kilo bell.
So you're not feeling pain, but your balance isn't quite right. And the cognitive load is still too high. So you're still thinking too much about what you're doing. It's not time to progress yet, buddy, which I know you're fine with. But this is what we want the good people to understand, that for someone at Jeremiah's level, and he is a very high level, he spent a lot of time doing this. This is a new thing. So for someone with his background and experience, if he does this, then you should probably do this too. Just take the time and figure it out and enjoy where you are. That's something that a lot of people are real hurry to move ahead. Enjoy being a beginner, because guess what? You look stupid. We all think you look stupid, but you're a beginner. You have an excuse.
Yeah.
In a couple months, you're gonna still look stupid probably, but you don't have a choice,
because you're not a beginner.
Right?
You're
not a beginner anymore. There's no excuse, rather. So you like it gets to be a lot less fun, and then you get to be an expert, and you do a bad rep, and everyone's looking at you because you have one bad rep. Like, whoa, what's wrong with this guy? Loser.
He's really off his game. We can't listen to him.
Time for him to retire.
That's enough kettlebells for you, Roger.
just enjoy being a beginner. But those are the three big things that I would say. Those are going to be very, very sharp or very strong, let's say bright red lights. Okay. Those are three things that say, hey, not time yet.
No time.
Okay.
All right.
You could throw in, as kind of an asterisk, that I just feel trashed after my workout still. How are you feeling? Are you still feeling like these are very challenging? Are you in a place where you were just learning a lift, right? And let's say you're learning to snatch and you're only doing a couple, but they still feel like, wow, like these are gassing me. I'm not doing that many. Maybe you can do 10, 20 swings at a clip, but 3-4 snatches and you're already out of breath. Well, guess what that means? That means that your body is not efficient at creating the movement yet. It's still learning it. And as you get better, right, as you learn it, it's going to get easier. It's going to require fewer resources physiologically, and you're not going to feel gassed. You're not going to feel tired. But
and I would say that leads right to the first, I think maybe green light, you tell me, is it's flat out. And you've gotten it down. You are no longer having to think about it, and it's sort of just boring. You're like,
yes,
I'm bored at this now. I've done this for forever.
Sometimes I've had this conversation with other trainers, and sometimes it's a legitimate gripe and sometimes it's not. Boredom often means one of two things. It usually means that someone isn't engaging, meaning they're not really paying attention to the exercise, so they're not getting a lot out of it, or it means that they've been doing the same thing for so long, they're so good at it that they don't need to do it anymore. Now, in this trainer's defense, having been a coach for a long time, it's usually the first. It's very rare that I have a client who's really good at a lift that does not want to do that lift or that exercise every time.
Yeah, because you're good at it. You can really excel. Yeah.
So
you can progress.
I think it was Socrates, through Plato, who suggested that we enjoy what we're good at. And that enjoyment doesn't have necessarily this innate quality. It comes down to us through that in which we excel. So, we don't, it doesn't really work like, oh, I enjoy this, let me get good at it. It's, I am good at it, therefore I enjoy it. And that's something to consider. So, you may be bored because you haven't really felt an exercise the right way, and you should consider that, but maybe you have. And maybe you're like, all right, I'm good at this, let me move on to something else. So boredom is a potential sign for, or a potential indicator that cognitive load is just too low. And we need to move someone to something a little more advanced.
Well, then that begs to question, maybe a green light here is if something's then subsequently easy or you're extremely efficient at it, how does that line up as one of a signal to progress?
Well, I mean, so being extremely efficient, if you are efficient, that's largely going to come down to a skill set that most of our listeners probably won't have unless you're a coach. What in efficiency has, I've heard lots of definitions. The one I use is being able to achieve a particular result with a minimal amount of resources. So let's take that lift. I was talking about a snatch before. Let's talk about that snatch. If I see a very smooth pattern, however the lifter lifts, regardless of the length of the arc, usually a closer arc rather than a longer arc for hard style. If I don't see a lot of shimmy of the hips, if I don't see any delays, if I don't see any disconnection or anything like that, I know that someone's pretty efficient at a movement. And I know the left side looks pretty close to the right side. And that's a big clue that, hey, we can move up. But what I will say is, to the credit of most people, when they actually pay attention, let's continue with the snatch. When you do a right one versus a wrong one, you see the light bulb go on. Like, whoa, that was awesome. Yeah. Like, that felt right. How'd that look? That was great. It was really, really good. So people often know when it feels good, and they know when it feels good when you're doing it. Are you doing a set and thinking, I hope my knee doesn't hurt this time? Well, if that's the case, then maybe it's not time to progress.
Yeah, maybe to red light pain.
Exactly.
And thinking.
But if you're like, wow, these man, I don't even feel these. This is just so much easier. I'm not out of breath like I used to be. That's a sign that you're getting more efficient with a lift. And that's a definite green light to be able to do more or harder or heavier or whatever.
And that's a pretty cool thing about kettlebells, regardless if it's a snatch, it's a swing, it's your press, it's really all the skills. You can go down the line and you can have those moments in all those skills. And you're like, oh, this is great. And even as you get to higher levels of your practice, you will understand that you may have a higher threshold of consistent reps, and then you get even better. This is a great rep sort of thing. So, maybe it's more frequently, or maybe it's just like, oh, that was way more solid. These are things that you can achieve. And I think that's a really good thing to kind of put in the back of your mind if you're thinking about, oh, should I progress this? Have I had any of these good feelings? Have I had a rep that I was like, yeah, light bulb, that's what's up? If you haven't, what's missing, right?
Let's put it in an even simpler way when it comes to efficiency. If you notice a bad rep, rather than a good rep,
you're pretty efficient.
Probably efficient.
Yeah. when the
if
bad ones
whoa,
stick
that wasn't
out.
good. Yeah. When the bad reps stick out, the assumption is that there are a lot more good reps. Now, it is possible that one is just particularly bad.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it's like, oh, that wasn't right. Well, that's probably an indicator that many of them, if not most of them, are. And that's what stands out. Whereas if you're like, oh, that was a good one, like, okay, good, good on you. Congratulations. But let's do that more and more before we really start loading it up. Or, one of the first things that people do with kettlebells, this is my favorite because I see this all over, you get, Dan John's stupidity is everywhere. And, oh, I've got to do 100 or I've got to do whatever, I've got to do my swing challenge. Like, okay, thanks, Dan. But people immediately think that every workout's got to be 100 plus because that's what you do with kettlebells. So, I can swing now.
Many as possible.
I mean, I wish, I have one client in particular. I taught him kettlebells. He was working with someone for a while, and first meeting that it's like, all right, well, what do you got? Like, what moves are you good at? And he's like, he said, can you swing? It's like, yeah, I can swing. He did one set. I said, no, you can't. Like, it was that simple. It was like, what do you mean? I was like, you did nothing right there.
Yeah.
And he, luckily my particular coaching style worked with him.
Yeah. But should be known, everybody. You're going to get the straight dope.
but, he had this idea. He'd work, well, this guy, was kettlebell certified. Like, okay.
Wasn't me, was it?
Maybe.
Oh, okay.
But anyhow, another rabbit hole, but the idea is yes, efficiency is important, and you should have a pretty good understanding of whether you're good and whether you're not. So, and that does lead into the boredom. If you're bored and you're good at something, then it's probably time to progress.
Yeah, and I think the big one that probably stands out the most in like conventional thinking of when it's time to progress is a stalled adaptation or a plateau of some sort. Something like that, something hasn't changed. Elaborate on that a little bit, and how can we identify we're at that stage of the game?
Well, one of the things I think about is adaptation, what they call adaptation schedules. So your muscles will adapt along a certain timeline, so will your connective tissues. And this varies for everybody. These are averages, so everyone's going to be a little different. But when let's say, this is true of some of my older clients. I work with people in their 80s. And by the time you're 80, things don't work the same way. And I'm not going to
that, Roger.
What was that?
They make pills for that now. So
I'm not going to put someone in harm's way, and I'm not going to have them do stupid things. And sometimes people will get dinged up, and you do when you work out. People get dinged up and hurt a little bit, but I'm not going to have someone be afraid to move. They need to continue to move because the reality of also getting older is you fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this might sound silly, but every time I hear one of my older clients say, tell me, come in like, man, I had a pretty bad fall. When? Oh, yesterday. And they feel like, man, I shouldn't be falling. It's like, I know you shouldn't be falling, so stop it.
Yeah,
but second of all, do you know that most people, when they fall at your age, are in the hospital? Like, you fell yesterday and you're here working out, and I'm not being any nicer to you than I normally am. So that's that's kind of a big thing. So we do need to put a little bit of muscle on people. We do need to get some strength, and we need to work with them where they are. Okay. So even though maybe their joints aren't working ideally, and they're never going to, okay, the bony changes are just too extreme, and to change that, if we can change that, would take too long. Like, I can get you, ship shape. Do you think you're going to live until you're 117? Because that's how old you're going to be when we can start safely overhead pressing. Yeah. Right? That's not realistic. So let's say we take these people, and you've been working with them for, I don't know, a particular exercise over the course of 15 weeks. And you're not really seeing any more improvement. You saw initial improvements, but you're not really seeing any more. I'd say it's probably time, as long as there's no pain or any of those other red lights, probably time to start progressing them a little more, because by then they've grown the muscle they can, and they've already started to really work on that connective tissue. So we don't take these crazy big jumps and, you change one thing at a time and you monitor, hey, how do you feel? But if you're not changing at all in that kind of a 15-week time frame, and this is on the high end, for other people, I wouldn't wait that long.
Yeah.
Then I'd say it's probably time to change the stimulus, because the stimulus you're currently using is no longer working. So we need to send a stronger signal. We do more reps, we rest less, we change the pace of the rep, or we add load. Maybe we do a different exercise entirely, or something similar.
All right.
So that's a pretty fair. It's like, okay, I've been doing this for a little while and it's not, I feel like I'm just kind of stuck here. Cool. Do something else. It doesn't mean the exercise was bad. It doesn't mean the program was bad. In fact, good programming is about changing things when they don't go well. And any really good, coach or person working a program knows that this is just the plan, and it almost never goes to plan, right?
Yeah.
So you need to be good enough to change. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got, if it's boring and your like nervous system is completely adapted to the stimulus or the movement or whatever, that's a green light to change. If you're efficient, and I like that, if you notice your bad reps more than your good reps, if you like notice a bad rep out of all the times when you normally do good reps, then you're probably, it's a good gauge of efficiency. And then if your adaptation is stalled, however, whatever that time frame looks like for you as an individual, provided you've given yourself enough time to put on a little bit of muscle and get those tissues ready to move on. We've talked about this in other episodes, so check them out. And now let's take a look at some ways to actually do that progression. Are you down with that? Some objective things you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, which is like load, intensity, which is volume and stuff like that. What are some of the things you go to as a progression, and do you have like an order in which you like might take on one of those things?
I don't have a set order. I don't have a sort of algorithm. It is very much goal dependent. What I will say is I think the tendency is to change too much. And when you change too much, you can't really track, if you've got a few different variables that you've changed. Let's say you change the load and you change the volume and you change the exercise, right? Oh, I got great results. Well, why?
Yeah. What was it?
What was the thing? Because I want to know what that thing is. And maybe over the course of working with you, maybe I'm your strength coach, and over the course of working with you for a year plus, I've realized that it really doesn't matter what we do. As long as I give you new exercises every 6 weeks, you're going to continue to grow like a beast. Maybe you respond really well to load, or maybe you respond really well to certain rep ranges. I really don't know. It's going to be goal dependent. Like everything is. And I know, that's kind of an annoying answer, but there are things called acute variables. And there are a few different ways that you can change a movement, and you can change, let's say we keep the exercise the same, but we change these variables. And some of the most common ones are going to be the number of sets, the number of reps. So we'll be focusing on the volume or the density of that. We can change the load, how heavy it is. Okay. We can decrease rest, or we can change the structure entirely and really work in a different energy system. Let's say we go from doing straight overhead presses to including a press in some sort of complex or chain, right? So there are different ways we can do that, but we're changing the way you're doing a particular movement rather than the movement itself. That's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it is you can change the movement itself, and you can change how that movement is executed. A lot of people, I think we touched on this last week, was a lot of people don't understand the inherent rotational nature of kettlebells. So they say, oh, well, I need to rotate better. And they take their kettlebell and they start doing, twisting with it and things like that. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying that's probably step 9 out of 10, whereas maybe we can start with step 1 out of 10. So if you want to add some rotation, go from a 2-arm swing to a 1-arm swing. And then if you're doing a 1-arm swing and you want to add some rotation, take one step back, do an offset stance. You can do traveling, you can do a lot of things where you can change the exercise. The swing is the same, but the way you do the swing changes. You could go from even if you didn't want to do the there is a little bit more play if you do you do 2 bells rather than 1. It's not the same thing. So how you impact the tissue and what you're expecting of the joints, it's a completely different thing. They've done some cool studies on the differences and how the muscles activate between a 1-arm swing and a 2-arm swing. So, we've got some science that actually bears this out. So there are different ways to do it, but I guess if I'm working for your average person, I like doing basic movements until you're good at them. You've built your skill, you've built your competency, and then we're going to start increasing volume. And we talk about the 1-5-1 method, right? Mm-hmm. So you go from your single, like, wow, I'm really not great at this. And your single is going to build up your movement competency until you're better. Now we can start doing ladders. We can start doing our 5, right? We get better at that. Okay, we're pretty good at ladders. Let's add a time component. Let's say this is swings, right? You're going to do one swing at a time. Then I'm going to do a swing ladder. I'm getting better. I'm starting to add some volume. Now you're really, really good at this. Now I'm going to do one. The last one is 1 minute or a minute. It's not just necessarily 1, but using a minute of time. Now we're going to start using that as a measure. Once we go through that process with a 2-arm swing, guess what I might do next? The
single arm swing
with a single arm swing.
All right.
So, it might seem
because that is a progression
boring.
From the 2-arm swing. Shocker.
It is a progression from the 2-arm swing. So in the first case, I'm changing the acute variables of the exercise. The exercise itself is staying the same. In the second instance, once I've progressed through the changes in the acute variables, I'm changing the way the exercise is done itself. So there's a completely different, not completely different, a similar, but different stimulus on the body.
Yeah, new enough to elicit some more change and get you out of that stalled adaptation or whatever the case may be, or gateway to additional movements and these sort of things.
And then once you've gained your proficiency there, I might play with some different adaptations. I might play with traveling. I might play with just a split. I would do a split stance first because it's simpler. Minimum effective dose. If you make small changes, then you have room to kind of sneak up on the big changes. If you go right to the big change, you go right to the circus act. It's like, there's a lot less to do. There's a lot less to do. You don't have any steps. You don't have any steps left to take or any other things to try because you did the hardest, most effective thing first.
Yeah, and give yourself some time. I think that's a big caveat too. Is like allow these things, just like you mentioned, to unfold and to like really settle in and if you follow this sort of thought process that we laid out, you're going to be able to find that down the road, you gave yourself adequate time that these progressions, even when you do make the progression, they're not as hard as when you started out the first time. You're like, you're sufficient, you're good to go. And that might be a mindset thing for a lot of people as well. I know setting expectations and things like that with yourself and with people you might be training, if you're a coach listening to this, that let's allow time, and you say this a lot too, Roger, allow time to help train us as well. Like allow these things. You don't have to say, oh, I've done this for a week, I should probably move to a single arm swing now. Well, you've done it for a week. Okay. Now do it for another 3 and then we'll talk about it, and then maybe we'll hike the bell off the ground.
And I'm still going to say no.
Yeah. Be conservative, right? Like you'll get there, if you're, if you're like, oh, I need something hardcore right now, hold your breath. All right. That's hardcore. I want to talk about one last thing, maybe before we wrap this up. like something subjective like an RPE, how effective is that, and how can you use that in determining whether you should progress or as a factors of your progression plan?
We've talked about this idea that we'd like to use objective and subjective measures. So the objective, which is close enough, is we've found a way, whether it's through direct testing or just working with someone for a while, to understand what their 1 rep max is, for example. If we're working, let's say, with a press or a squat, something, a grind lift. Works for ballistics too, but it's a little easier to illustrate with the grinds. So we understand that your 1 rep max, what's your 1 rep max right now? Do you know?
For press? Well, last time I 1 rep max, it was the 44 kilo.
Okay. So 44 represents 100% of what you can do. So I know if I'm training you for strength that I have probably conservatively down to 70% of that. Might be a little lower, might be a little higher depending upon you. But let's say I want to keep you in the 75, 80% range. I'm focusing on what you can do objectively. Are those numbers trending up or are they not? Are you now able to, kettlebells are a little bit of a strange creature in this regard, but can you press a 44 twice now? Because if you can, it's not your 1 rep max anymore. Now
I actually did press it twice, Roger. Okay. So I'm a liar. Thank you for calling me out.
So you may not be able to press the 48. Maybe your real 1 rep max is 45.5 pounds, right? Who knows? Yeah. 46 or 47.2
kilos, not pounds.
No,
right?
Yeah, that's true.
Give me some credit.
Kilos. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to horrify you.
Yeah, I mean, how can you take me seriously at this point? I'm just kidding.
You may not be able to fully express that 48, and you're somewhere in between. But I know if I've taken you from a place where you can do it once and now you can do it twice, we have an objective measure that you're getting better. But let's say, 3-4 months down the line, you're still only pressing it twice and it's not moving anymore. It's like, all right, you're stalled, buddy. Let's figure out another way to come at this, give you a novel stimulus so we can bust that plateau. So we want the objective. Subjectively, we have the RPE scale. So the rate of perceived exertion. If when we first start these pressing workouts, you're kind of clocking it at 7-8 intensity out of 10. And, you're working moderate to hard. And then that 6 months again, like, well, how hard have these workouts been? I don't know, like a 4 or 5. Okay. Well, then this really isn't working for you. So let's change the stimulus. And I might drop load and increase reps. I might find some, what some people like to call specialized variety. Let's do some accessory work. Other people call it accessory work. Or maybe I find something like a parallel form of stimulus that allows you to really juice up your brain, but it's not a press. And for me, I love to go to a deadlift. Because when you're pulling, if you're trying to press a bell that's 106 pounds, but you're pulling 400 pounds off the ground, that 106 pound bell does not feel quite as heavy as it once did.
Yeah. Pro tip: if you're trying to press more, do those deadlifts and you'll probably press more. At least I did.
It usually helps. So that's how we can look at subjective and objective. But for those of you who are not regularly checking with your numbers, then think to yourself, how hard was this workout? Let's look at, on a rating scale, 1 to 5, 1 to 10, whatever it happens to be. How hard have my workouts been over this period of time? And if it's the same workout, it's not that hard anymore, then that's a pretty good indicator that it's time to progress.
Yeah, and that's all going to be individual, hence the subjective part. So if you are a coach, asking those questions, how do you feel? What is this at for you? And then let alone for yourself, these could be, key indicators. If it's lined up with some of those other things that we said are green lights, then you've got a clear path. If there are some of those red lights in there, or these objective or subjective indicators aren't in your favor, then just hold off a little bit and just get better and have patience with yourself. And I think, you can take these sort of things and evaluate whatever or wherever you are in your training day, program, week, whatever it is you're doing, even if it's general fitness, to get better and decide if that's a move you need to make. Is there anything else you want to add to this one, Roger?
No, I think that's enough to get people started.
All right. Well, we hope that answered your question. And if you have questions, submit them because we will answer them, or at least try to answer them. And if we can't, then we'll ignore you and hope that you go away. It's called ghosting. It's what teenagers do to their significant others when they're tired of them. At least that's what I did as a teenager. Anyways, it was a long time ago and I was a different person, Roger. So be sure to download the Bells app. You can easily progress in there because there's a quick little dial that you can change the weight. So you're like, oh, I was doing 16. Now I'm doing 40. I'm progressing. All right. Guaranteed success. It's from the Apple App Store. And like and subscribe. Most of you watch this and aren't subscribed, so change that. We only come out once a week. We're good for you. We're good for your brain and your soul. All right.
Definitely
stay strong, everybody.